Hello, mentors. Welcome to our podcast series, Mentorships in Education, brought to you by Just Education at justeducationfirst.com. I am your host, Judi Epstein. I am very excited about the wide range of experts who have volunteered to give up their time and expertise. They will share their innovative ideas, their exciting perspectives, their rich resources, and their research with us. Please continue to delve into these topics on their websites and with your legal counsel, healthcare provider, and education professional. Our guests will have information that will be relevant to mentors supporting struggling students, parents, teachers, administrators, legal support, and health professionals. We will address all levels of education with issues that affect academic performance. Our goal is to open discussions and introduce a variety of approaches to those searching for information in a free venue. So mentors, let me introduce our guests for today. I want to welcome everyone to our Just Education podcast, sponsored by Just Education First at justeducationfirst.com. Our podcast is called Mentorships in Education. Please visit our website and explore our library of resources. They are all free, and we hope that they will give you a foundation of information so you can pursue some of these topics on your own. We're going to continue our investigation with our very special guest today, who I have to say has enlightened me and inspired me to create the mini-series that I will talk to you about a little bit later on nutrition and health for our students. I want to welcome Dr. Anthony Dissen to our podcast. Welcome. Thank you so very much for coming.
It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I want to talk a little bit about who you are and how we got to meet each other. Dr. Anthony Dissen is a professor with my brother at Stockton University in New Jersey. And when I was talking to my brother about my podcast and how I was trying to think out of the box and try and find some connecting areas to talk about, my brother said to me, I know somebody that you have to talk to. And so Anthony and I have been talking back and forth, and he has inspired me to do my due diligence in a totally different area, and I hope that you get as much out of this and be as inspired as I have been. Anthony, can you explain the alphabet after your name? Because I'm not familiar with all of those. Other than the doctor part.
Yeah, isn't it obnoxious?
Please.
Yeah, so I am, first and foremost, I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist. Okay. I have been practicing as a registered dietitian now for just about 10 years, actually a little over 10 years now. I also hold a Master of Arts degrees in holistic health studies from Georgian Court University here in New Jersey. And I also hold a Master of Public Health degree from the University of Massachusetts Amherst in Public Health Nutrition.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Because I had no idea what some of those were. I really appreciate it.
I know. I get that.
You're an avid proponent of public health education.
Yes.
And you do a lot of presentations around New Jersey in and out of that area. And you're a plant-based, you're a plant-based advocate for nutrition. Can I say that correctly?
I think that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. A lifestyle medicine connection.
Yes.
You are very interested in mindfulness, and that's one of the connections that we have because I do a lot of mindfulness training. And integrative wellness. When you say integrative wellness, are you talking about integrative with the medical field as well? Or what do you mean by integrative as alternative health and medicine?
No, that's a great question. What I mean, personally, at least what I mean by integrative is, yes, how all these things come together in terms of primary, what we might call primary kind of care medicine, but also where lifestyle comes in, and then where we might call the holistic or functional forms of care, like where do things like meditation and mindfulness and even modalities like acupuncture appropriate forms of herbal medicine. How do all of those come together into someone's care? Because sometimes I think people think it's all one or the other, and they forget that there are ways that they can integrate all these things together.
Okay. I was wondering what you meant by that.
Yes.
You have spoken at the Breast Cancer Resource Center in New Jersey, Gilda's Club of South Jersey, and David's Dream and Believe Cancer Foundation. And I'm assuming if someone wanted you to come, you would travel if you were able to do that.
Always.
If anyone wants you to get any more information about you, they can go to your website. Is it a website?
It is.
At www.anthonydissen.com. And we'll be repeating that, but it's www.anthonydissen.com. And is it a capital A and a capital D? Does it need to be capitalized?
I actually don't think it does. I think either one will get you there.
Okay. All right. Okay. So let's get into some of the nitty gritty here. You and I have spoken, but I want you to share with our listeners, our mentors, what was your aha moment here that made you go in this direction of planning, formulating, putting so much time and effort into developing some research on nutrition in college students?
Yeah, so I mean, this really for myself comes quite a long journey throughout my education and career. I mean, I think even beyond what we've spoken about already, I can track this back to when I was an undergraduate, where I had the joy to work for something called the Healthy Dining Team when I was an undergraduate at Rutgers University. And everything that we did not only prepared me for my career as a dietitian, but really focused on the role of nutrition in the college student, because we were working with our peers, basically our fellow undergraduates. And what I found so important about that was it was more than the way that nutrition is so often presented, and in a good way, that it is presented as, well, there's nutrition as calories and carbs and fats and proteins and fiber, and sort of that aspect of nutrition, which has tremendous value. But then we would also talk about how nutrition impacts concentration, or how an inability to access quality food makes a profound impact on academic performance and these sorts of things. And so it really was an early education for me of how much nutrition is more than just the clinical way or the medical way that we look at nutrition, that it goes far beyond that. And then fast forward these numbers of years, I had the great opportunity to serve as a research advisor to a student at the university where I work now at Stockton University. Her name is Judi Davis, and she was one of our absolute shining star students. I was so blessed to know. She's actually working as a food systems fellow for Newman's own foundation right now. So she herself, wow. We're all going to be working for her one day, I guarantee. Wow. But she wanted to do an undergraduate research project with something with nutrition, and we had a number of wonderful brainstorming sessions. And she also found this idea of how nutrition really impacts performance as very interesting. And so what Judi did for her fellowship research project was to look at how nutrition, and specifically nutrition security or food security, which for anyone that's not familiar with that term, basically all food security is whether or not I know where my next meal is going to come from. And the simplest, kind of definition of, do I know I can get food the next time I'm hungry? And so what she did was look to see how that impacts high school graduation rates. And she looked at a number of different high schools in the area, and even did some nutrition education work at these local high schools about schools that have what we might call low food security or food insecurity, also correlated with difficulties with graduation rates, which by all means makes sense that there would be sort of this connection that people who are food insecure are also potentially going to be dealing with not just also financial insecurity, but then that means that the need for survival, to find food, to pay for shelter, that's going to outweigh studying or writing a paper or something that does not immediately have that same sense of survival concern. And so her work with that, a fabulous project, I mean, really has always stuck with me. And so then the conversation kind of continued after she graduated, as all great students do. And so, well, what do we kind of go forward with from here? And so what I have been wanting to do, and I'm currently trying to put together to implement at Stockton at least, is, well, how do we track the food security of our own students? And is this potentially an area of great importance about whether they are able to not only graduate, but do they stay with us, or do they take large amounts of gap years, or their connections with being on academic probation, or some of these things that we so often only associate with their intelligence or their academic seriousness. But maybe they're perfectly intelligent and serious students, but they may have some very real survival needs that are outweighing coming to class. And is perhaps food one of those ones that is so easily forgotten about because we just assume anyone can get access to food?
So you've mentioned a couple of the concepts that you're going to be exploring. Have you yet? I just want to clear for our mentors that this is not a study that has begun yet. This is something you're planning on doing in the fall, starting in the next fall, developing it over the next year. Is that
correct? Correct. Yes, this is very much in the development phase, because this will definitely require a team that is more than just a study of one investigator. So I'm in the process of reaching out to my colleagues in different fields, because there are things that our colleagues who are experts in social sciences are going to be able to talk about that I'm not going to be able to consider, and vice versa. So the hope is that we'll get a nice team of investigators together that maybe in the next year or two, we could have a very well designed study that my hope is that we could do in some sort of cohort model of tracking students that are coming in as freshmen, and seeing what we can gather with them. And again, these are all the sorts of pieces that still need to be fully fleshed out, of tracking to see, well, who graduates and, whatever this means, on time, within those prescribed 4 years, and who doesn't, and how can we best assess their food security, and maybe some other important factors as well, to see not just which ones appear to be most strongly correlated with their ability to graduate on time, but the other half of this that I really want to look at is whether or not we as an institution then are providing students with the kind of support and resources they need to be food secure if they are lacking the financial ability or the transportation ability to gain access to food on their own.
So there's two levels here, looking at food security and then doing something about it if some students aren't able to meet that.
That's exactly right.
Their need. That I didn't realize that you'd be doing that. That's really interesting. You're going to have a top layer, I'll call it the panel, of professionals who will be working together on this study. Are you going to be utilizing students as well to help at all on this?
That would be a lovely thing if we can gain students not only to help with the recruitment and design aspect of it, but personally, and this is by no means unique to me, a lot of us really want our students to be more engaged in research at the undergraduate level. And so to be able to do a longer term study versus just a 3-week or a 4-week kind of experience, which undergraduates are normally able to access, that I think it would be lovely if we could get some of our more research oriented students engaged in this, where they could actually be a part of this for at least a year or two of their time, not only to help with the success of the study, but to really help them develop their own research skills as well.
All right, I have one more question before I'm going to move down a little bit, but I'm curious, have you put this on a timeline of some kind? Do you know what the phases are that you need to do along the way? And at what point do you think you'll be ready to actually start the study?
Oh, isn't that the right question?
Sorry.
My hope would be either the fall of 2020 or the fall of 2021. That is my hope. Part of it because there's a couple research projects that I'm just wrapping up right now, and I'm going through that lovely process of, manuscript writing and submissions. So that's taking a little bit of time. And so I want to make sure those are more closed up so I can dedicate more time to this. So my hope is fall of 2020, or at the latest, the fall of 2021, that ideally fall of 2020, that we would have it would be beginning, our pilot would be beginning. And so my hope is by the end of this calendar year, by the end of 2019, to see whether or not I have colleagues who would be interested in finalizing this and working on this project with me. So the hope is by this December to know whether or not there's enough interest from some of my fellow faculty to put this together.
If you don't start it in the fall of 2020, is it on a continuum where you could start it any time during the year, or do you have to wait for the next fall?
The reason why I'm focusing on fall is, like most universities, we have something kind of designed for our first semester freshmen. We call them freshman seminars. Okay. And the hope is that if we know who's enrolling in these freshman seminars, that these would be honest to goodness first semester freshmen coming in. If we started the following spring of 2021, that by all means could certainly work out as well. The only thing is we'd either already have them a full semester in, and maybe that wouldn't make a difference, but it would just be something we'd need to determine if that would be a factor to consider. Or if we wanted to wait for that following fall of 2021, where again, we could get people coming in fresh. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. A good point. So when you and I were talking, kind of just, you were explaining to me what you were doing, one of the terms you used was that there may be some barriers to this, and I think you've addressed some of them in terms of gathering a panel and hoping that you find, but are there any other barriers that you're looking at that may affect this study that you're going to have to be aware of as the study unfolds? One of the biggest barriers, I think, would, and especially when working with students, because so much of this might be based on their self-reported life experiences, is do they even understand what food security is? Because there's many professionals who don't necessarily understand. So without priming them too much, where we're kind of skewing the data in a certain direction, would be to make sure, what do we need to do that when we're asking students to talk about their food security, what they really mean by that? Or do they understand what we mean by that, I should say? So one barrier I do believe would be oftentimes people, and especially younger people like traditional aged undergraduate students, might be food insecure and not realize they're food insecure, because either they have just been going their whole life being food insecure. So for them, this is just the fabric of their life and it doesn't seem that different. Or they may not realize that food insecurity is not the same thing as something more extreme like hunger and homelessness. That it could, and many times students might come from homes that are perfectly food secure, but now they're living on a college campus, potentially not working, they're going to school full time, their priorities have shifted, and oftentimes students become food insecure just by entering a four-year university kind of setting. Yes. Good. I just wanted to interject. I would assume then that one of the categories they're going to have to check during your survey is whether they have a campus meal program or whether they don't and they have to go off campus or buy each of their meals individually. That's right. And part of that is, again, sometimes students don't realize how much they need these meal plans. And so one of the nice things with freshman students is usually they are required to have a meal plan that covers at least a base number of meals. But sometimes that is limited if they aren't necessarily living on campus. And so part of it is for them to understand where they think their food is coming from. We have some students that, in addition to potential food security issues, may also have home and security issues as well, in terms of when the university closes, do they have a place to stay? And so they might go through transient periods of being more or less food secure, where maybe Monday through Friday they have access to food, but then they go home on the weekends and they're going home to a family that might be food insecure. So they might have access to these resources that the university provides through the week, but then if they go home on many weekends, which many of our students do, they may be returning to a food insecure area where it could be this silent factor in the background of it's the weekend, they're trying to catch up on work, but they're also food insecure. And it makes this undercurrent of difficulty to succeeding academically. Or on another aspect of this, they may choose a job because they need money to pay for food that isn't maybe quite as beneficial to their long-term academic or career goals, because maybe a job or even a internship that might not pay anything might be amazing for them 4 years from now when it's going to help them get into graduate school or help them get a job. But they're so focused on immediate survival that to have the money they need to purchase food, they may choose a less advantageous kind of campus job-based work where they're able to get money so that they are able to stay food secure, but then they don't get that valuable work experience they need to get into a graduate program or get into the kind of job they hope to get into after graduation. So every time I think about this, there's all these additional branches that keep coming out.
I'm going to throw one more out at you as
Please.
You're talking. I'm thinking all of these are certainly byproducts of food insecurity, having to get a job, going home, the stress of going home where there isn't food, where on campus maybe they're part of a meal plan and they have food. But there's a component that you haven't mentioned, and I'm wondering if you're going to be looking into the aspect of, as a nutritionist, as a dietitian, whether you're going to be looking into whether food insecurity has affected their health in any ways, in terms of obesity or in terms of, I don't know what some of the things that can manifest themselves, heart disease, is that a component that you're going to have as part of the study, or you don't want to go into that?
That's a wonderful question. So to answer your question, the dietitian part of me would love to be able to do those sorts of biometric screenings to see that our students who are reporting or being found to be more food insecure also dealing with larger waist circumferences or BMI or those sorts of things. The difference there is if we're going to be measuring that, then not only will we need now either a physician or a nurse or someone as part of our team who's able to do those kinds of screenings, but it would add an additional layer to the IRB process. And for any listeners who aren't familiar, IRB, or Institutional Review Board, all hospitals, universities, most organizations that might be doing research, in order to make sure that all research that's being conducted is ethical and is not putting any harm to individuals as well as animals, especially vulnerable populations, that there is a review board that will review every single ounce, every inch of your research proposal before you're allowed to do anything with it. And anytime we're collecting biometric data, it requires more stringent overview by the IRB. So that is by no means an automatic no, but it does mean then that if we wanted to add those biometric screenings to it, it will most likely delay the onset of the study a bit, because we would need additional time to create whatever protocols we need in terms of how that data is going to be collected, how are people's identity is going to be kept private, so we're not violating any, HIPAA related things. And so it's a great question. To answer it, really, I don't know at this point. I think if we could get some of our nursing faculty or other people who might be interested, it'll add a little more time, but that's okay. But if we find that we don't have an ability to bring on the kinds of healthcare practitioners we would need to do that, that might need to be something that we do as a phase 2. So maybe phase 1 might be collecting some of this more social data first. And then if it seems like there's something of value, we could then ask the follow-up question of, now what does this mean for their health? And we could potentially do another cohort where we add the biometric screening on too. And so at this initial stage, if I had to pick, I'd probably not bring the biometrics in right now. unless I have, again, maybe some faculty in our nursing program that are very eager to be able to offer that, in which case they may be able to do the legwork necessary to get that protocol IRB ready.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking as someone who, because I was going to be doing this interview with you, I started reading some studies to try and familiarize myself with some of the terminology and to be able to ask an intelligent question, because I really didn't know very much about this. And I'm just wondering, as you're speaking, because they are so closely related, if you focus on the first part, which is great, if you don't then follow through the second part, would that be a question that people would have about the study if they were reading it, as to whether these other mitigating factors, what part they played in, the retention of students in college. I asked you earlier what the focus of the study was, and I don't remember your specifically answering it, but is it accurate if I say that you're looking to see over the year whether students' nutritional access has any impact on their staying at school and graduating? Is that the focus of this part of the study?
That's the main, yes, I would say that's the main question, because not only do I think that's an important question to ask, but I think our institution, as well as many others, would want to know that if all academic institutions, especially higher ed right now, are so focused on retention, well, if we are able to find in this study or a similar kind of study that students with better access and regular access to food to improve their food security status, if they are more likely to maintain their enrollment at this institution because they're being provided with the resources they need, that is something I think an institution would want to know, because if we are finding that students are reporting that there's just no access to food over the weekend because the dining hall is not open, or there's no access to food at 10 p.m. at night when they're up working because everything closes at 5 p.m. It's, if we're finding that those are things that are barriers to not only their academic success, but even whether they want to stay enrolled at this institution or not, I think that would be very valuable data to bring to an institution to say, we need to allocate the necessary resources and funds, because our students, they're not going to stay here if they can go to another institution where, the dining hall is open till 1 a.m. and they're open every weekend, and they have access to the food they need.
Mm-hmm. When I was looking at some of these studies, I noticed that there was a different approach to working with the student surveys. So some of them had I don't know what the right terms are, but you can fill me in. A group that they keep throughout the program, and they give them whatever they need that they're evaluating to make sure that they have it. And then they have another group that doesn't get the right food, or they're kind of left on their own. And they follow those two groups for the period of the study. Now, the other protocol that I noticed was that they don't have either of those two groups. They just arbitrarily go into the cafeteria, go into the local fast food places, and for the kids who are registered in whatever atmosphere it is that they're drawing their population from, they give them a survey and a sheet giving them permission to be able to use this information. And they collect it that way. Have you decided how you're going to do this?
No, that's a good question. So the earlier kind of example that you shared would be whether we'd have a control group versus an experimental group. And so just as which you explained perfectly. So a control group is, we basically would do something like a pre-test and a post-test, and we wouldn't really do any kind of intervention. Where an experimental group might get that same pre-test and post-test, but they're also given food stamps, or they're also given some sort of intervention, and then at the end of the semester or the end of the academic year would look to see, is there any measurable statistically significant difference and if there is, then it might show validity to providing these kinds of things. at least for this initial aspect of this study, most likely that's not the direction that we would go, because it's not so much to bring in a particular intervention so much as it is to do more of what might be called an observational study, which is closer to the second example that you shared of the USDA has what they call the ERS, or the Economic Research Service, that they offer. And they have a number of approved, validated survey tools that specifically focus on food security. And so at least the way I envision this, but again, this is why I want to work with especially some of my more seasoned colleagues who are much more steeped in research than I am, that can really help to pinpoint these things down, is to do something more observational, where we might pick a number of, maybe it's these freshman seminars or whatever that is, that might be, and everybody enrolled in those classes or whatever sequence of courses we might choose, and just give them these surveys. And maybe we give them at the beginning of the semester or the beginning and the end of the semester, and then basically follow up at the end of the semester or the academic year to see, well, what were their grades like, and how many of them, dropped out, and how many of them retained. And then look to see from there, is there anything correlated with their results from these surveys? That, did students who didn't retain their enrollment at university, or students that earned less than a C grade, or whatever it is that we might decide is our lens that we're going to be looking through, is it correlated with a lower score on these surveys, that the ones that found to be more at risk for food insecurity also happen to be the ones that were not performing academically as well, or not retaining their enrollment? Or maybe we'll find that there isn't. And so maybe food security may not be the most important factor that's influencing their stay at the university, and there might be other things as well. But most likely that is what I'm hoping to be able to do, is something more of an observational study, where we decide what our cohort's going to be, and we just survey them to see what their food security status is, and then look to see who stays and what their grades are, and notice if the data shows any kind of correlation or not.
So are you going to take the freshman class, you're giving them this, whatever workshops you're going to be targeting, you give them the survey at the beginning, you give them the survey maybe in the middle and the end, whatever, and are you going to then follow them when they become sophomores and juniors and seniors?
In a perfect world, yes. What I would love to do is what would then be referred to more as a longitudinal study.
Exactly.
Where we maybe are following them for a number of years. And every fall semester, we look up to see where they are. We ask them to fill up this survey, and we follow up with and maybe we're just looking at GPA, cumulative GPA, and whether they're still enrolled or not. And look to see, by the time they hit 4 years, did their food security get better? Did it stay the same? And then same thing with their academic performance.
That would be interesting.
That is what I think would be the best. I think a single semester is interesting, but I don't think it's telling. I think a number of semesters or a number of years would give us something more significant in terms of whether or not our students have enough of an issue with food insecurity that it's impacting their academic success.
Well, it's certainly the first year is going to raise a lot of questions. And some of those questions will only be answered if you follow it along.
That is exactly right.
Now, you're going to find out in the freshman class that some students do have food insecurity. They might be on a meal plan and have food insecurity at home. They might not be on a meal plan and have food insecurity at school, but have plenty of food at home. You said that if you had students that were having these issues, that you weren't just taking data. Another component of your study was going to be to help these students. How are you going to address that?
The hope from there would be is if we're getting data that's really showing that our students are struggling with food security, whether that's at home or also while they are on campus, to be able to then put something like a white paper together or something to bring this data to our food service that we contract with, as well as the university administration itself, to show we're seeing that our students are food insecure. So either they don't know what is already available to them, and maybe we need to invest more time during transfer orientation and freshman orientation time to let them know what resources are available, or maybe we're not offering adequate resources. And this hopefully would lend some validity to say this is why we need to allocate, whether it's budget or whether it's resources or whether it's extending hours at the dining hall or whatever it is that it might be, because our students are showing that they cannot access food while they're on campus. Or maybe they're fine on campus, but they're bad at home,
Exactly.
in which case maybe we need to invest more money in our student food pantry so that they have food that they can take home with them during the breaks or during weekends or these sorts of things. And so the hope would be to be able to create some sort of white paper or something that we could have a deliverable to the institution to share. Either we're doing a great job and isn't that great, or more likely, these are the pitfalls, these are the gaps, and here's some data to support that. So let's try to do something to fill these gaps in.
So is this some intervention that you see happening right away if you find students that are having those issues?
Oh, I don't know.
or do you, if that were the case, then would that affect the study that you were then?
If we're truly finding that the data is showing that we're lacking, I think the ethical thing would be to stop the study and say we have found data, and it's important enough that we think, okay, we've collected it to the point that we have an answer to our question. Now let's do something in addition to publishing it, to share it with the scholarly journals and things like that, but to actually bring this to our institution to share. We need to do something. We have students that are hungry or students that don't have access to food. What are we going to do about it? So I would rather the study last 1 year and have very clear data and stop it, and then versus, well, we said we'd do it 4, so we might as well continue it and then wait 3 more years before sharing. So I think a lot of that will come out of in that first 1 or 2 semesters of whether or not it's clear that our students are struggling with food insecurity related issues or not. And then especially if it's showing any kind of impact on their academic success, I think that is something where any higher ed institution would really pay attention to, beyond just the moral aspect of it, but also the very real business aspect of, if we want good retention rates for our students, this very well may be something that, despite our best efforts, would impede our ability to support our students staying at this institution. We need to do something as fundamental as getting them food.
You talked to me when we were speaking before about the hierarchy of needs. And
yes.
I'm certainly familiar with that, but you're kind of talking around it. Maybe you can address that a little bit.
Yes. So, this is something I'm sure a lot of people have come across before in one way or another, but I'm very much a proponent of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because I think it tells very much that before we can do something as noble in higher education, which I think was what we're all of us in education, whether we're in K through 12 or higher ed, of self-actualization, of helping students to realize their potential, their creative outputs and endeavors, that none of that is possible if their basic needs aren't met. And so for anyone that may not be familiar, the basic needs to Maslow's pyramid are physiological needs, which are food, rest, and water and warmth, as well as safety needs. So literally security and safety.
That's the foundation.
Exactly. And so I think as noble as it is with all of us that work in education, that we talk to our students about self-reflection and critical thinking skills and all these things, that's just not possible if someone genuinely is worried about whether they will have breakfast tomorrow. And so I think before we can ask of our students to go through the kind of transformational journey that we're asking them to go through higher ed, that we have to make sure that they have the foundation, and yet you just said, the bedrock under their feet to be safe and be secure and well nourished enough to be able to go to that next level.
Okay. I think that I am familiar with that. Of course, it's a pyramid. And as
Yes.
you go up, the foundation is the wide part of the pyramid, and the criteria that you just mentioned compose that wide part. So if a student isn't able to meet the needs of safety, if someone doesn't feel safe, if someone doesn't feel they don't have food, if they're not clothed properly for different seasons and so forth, then that becomes the priority, not the education that we're trying to provide for them. And kids who come into school get in for a variety of reasons, but we really don't check to see whether these other needs have been met and what the potential is for them as a student once they get there if these other needs aren't met. That's why I was so interested in what it is that you're doing, because you're really getting back to the nitty-gritty and making kids aware that it isn't just whether you get an A, B, C, or D. That's not the only thing that's important that we care about. We care about you as a person and whether or not you're happy and you're being taken care of. And to me, that was the I guess what drew me into your study that I felt was so timely. We have so many kids today that have so many needs in so many areas, and certainly their academic performance, as we see when we get into school and some of the problems that we're having, their academic performance is not what they're focused on. And we don't really have an understanding of why that's happening.
Absolutely. I in one of my nutrition courses, I always ask my students, who here has ever even looked to see if you're eligible for, what used to be called food stamps is now called SNAP or supplemental nutrition assistance, but it's the same basic idea that, you may be very eligible for these things, and it's not a source of shame or embarrassment. These things aren't here to be stigmatizing. They're here to provide the very real needs that people have. And sometimes those needs are very short term. This might just be something you need for the next year, and then you're fine. But I think a lot of times people don't realize what's available to them, or that something as fundamental to human life as food. It's hard to work a job. It's hard to study for a class. It's hard to take standardized tests for med school and all these things you want to do if you are hungry. Or at least you are worried about where your food is coming from. And so I know it's what continues to fascinate me about this field in nutrition, that there is the medical side of it, which in of itself is fascinating, but there's this whole social aspect to it as well that is far beyond physical health, but we get into security-based concerns that I think sometimes in a country where we forget that there's still a lot of concerns with food security that we sometimes don't give quite the attention it needs.
I'm just going to share with you a true story. I started teaching, I guess I'm dating myself, but I started teaching in the early 70s in Massachusetts when they started busing kids to different schools. And our school had quite a few kids coming in from a very needy community into a more affluent community. And one of the students who was in my class, and I was in middle school, moved to other classes. The teachers and I were talking. We were noticing with each other that this student, whatever class he had first period, when he came in, he'd fall asleep. And so we all brought him into a little meeting because we wanted to talk about this and try and understand what was happening. It got better as the day went on, but that first class just knocked him out. And he shared with us that he was hungry when he got up in the morning. The only thing that was in the refrigerator was beer. So he was having a can of beer before he came to school every morning to fill up his stomach so he wouldn't be hungry, and he was going to sleep. So what you're doing kind of reminded me about that. You're talking about college kids, but certainly this is an awareness we need to have with kids from preschool to through high school. We have a tendency to blow off aberrant or disinterested behavior as immaturity or sometimes a diagnosis, and we don't really look into some of the other components on that hierarchy of needs, some of the very base components, to see whether they're being met. And I'm beginning to learn that a lot of kids who might not have enough iron, for example, or magnesium, or that can affect a lot of your behavior, your ability to focus. And that's why I'm very excited about this, because I'm learning so much about it. You're kind of starting a very timely study. I think people are just beginning to recognize this, and I'm going to be looking forward to seeing the kind of information you come up with. I hope that we can get together down the road and follow this through a little bit.
I would love that. I will definitely keep you posted, and I'm sure the number of permutations and changes this will keep taking to finally see whatever the final form of it will be. And I too am going to be deeply curious. I truly don't know what the answer will be, and that's the way I think research is supposed to be done. If we already knew our students were having food security issues, we should be doing a study on it. So I'll be very genuinely curious to see what we come to find.
Well, I'm going to kind of touch base with you. I'd like to know who your panel is, and maybe we can do something. If you get this going in the fall, maybe we can do something in terms of the panel and what their criteria are. Maybe we can get people together and kind of talk about what their role will be. I'd like to do that. Thank you. I want to thank you so much, Anthony, for giving so much of your time. Dr. Dissen, why don't you give your connection information in case anyone has any questions on this, may want to participate, or may want to learn about this as it goes along. So why don't you give them some information so that they can follow through if they'd like to do that?
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to. So as you had mentioned earlier, anyone who wants to get into contact with me, as well as see some of the community and public health work that I do, if you happen to be in the New Jersey area, is just my website, which again is just my name, Anthony Dissen, DISSEN.com. Through that, you can also directly email me, but if you would prefer just to email, you can also email me through my associated email address, which is my name, Anthony Dissen, RD, that's RD for registered dietitian, @gmail.com, which is associated with the website as well. So either one will get you in contact with me. If there's information I could share, if anyone's curious to just be in contact with this or anything else related to this idea of how nutrition impacts our lives.
That's great. Thank you. I hope that you get some feedback from this, some questions. I will tell our audience that I'm sitting here looking at you, and you're about the age of my kids. And so I think it's so exciting that you are, involved in this, and that you think this is such a timely issue. Given that you're relatively young and certainly have a lot of other things going on in your life. I want our mentors to know that this is going to be the beginning of a mini series. I became so fascinated with this topic that I've been reaching out to people in various areas of health care, particularly on diet, and talking to them about some alternative ways to combine the medical approach to working with kids and behavior issues and cognitive challenges. And we're going to be doing this over the next month or two. I think if you were to join us, you will find that I have some people that you may even be familiar with, because they have websites of their own and are very well known in this field. So thank you again, Dr. Dissen, for joining us. And please, mentors, go to justeducationfirst.com to get more information about our podcast and to let me know what you think about what's going on. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. Thank you, mentors, for being with us today. If you found this podcast of value, please visit justeducationfirst.com to subscribe to our blog and mentorship and education podcast so that you may continue the exploration with us. Our goal is to provide a free treasury of information for our listeners so they can become acquainted with the amazing resources that we have available to us. We want to thank all of our guests for giving their time and sharing their wealth of information with us. Please also visit their websites and explore more of their resources to further your pursuit of the topic. Hope to hear from you at justeducationfirst.com. Have a good week, and thank you.